What is up, people? It is Dave, it is Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Cleveland, Ohio, masked metal masters, Mushroomhead. The band's new album, Call the Devil, will be released on August 9th via Napalm Records. Following the breakout success of their 8th studio album and Napalm Records' debut, 2020's A Wonderful Life, masked metal masters Mushroomhead return with 2024's cinematic Call the Devil, laying waste to any preconceived notions of where the band is headed in their third decade of reign. Returning after a 12-year hiatus, longtime guitarist Dave "Gravy" Felton, who performed on several of the band's biggest albums and is credited as a primary songwriter on classic anthems like Along the Way, Sun Doesn't Rise, and The Dream Is Over, contributes his trademark skills to 2 album tracks. It's also the first album to feature guitarist Joe Jenkins Gall and vocalist Scott Beck and drummer Avden Kerr. Call the Devil once again features production by band mastermind drummer Skinny, as well as the return of Matt Wallace, who has worked with Faith No More and Three Doors Down on mixing, also recognised for his work on Mushroomhead's iconic album 13. The album is also the band's first to feature mastering from Jakob Hansen, who has worked with Volbeat Epica and Arch Enemy. 30 years into their groundbreaking history, Mushroomhead shows no signs of slowing down, proving innovative without losing sight of their trademark sound and imagery. Call the Devil boasts everything from bangers to ballads, providing a strong variety that every heavy music fan will have on repeat. So, that still wrecks my head that they've been going for over 30 years. What the
I mean, it doesn't. If you remember rightly, we're old enough to remember all this. Like, Mushroomhead when Mushroomhead had that breakout, what was it? XX album.
Yeah, so...
When that came out in 2001, and the instant comparison to them was Slipknot, and the retort by anyone at that point was, no, they've been on the go so much longer than Slipknot. So it was almost like it became a kind of, and like we got stressed, neither band sounded like the other. No. It was purely that they wore masks and kind of boiler suits, and that was it. Yeah. So there was all these accusations about who copied who, when I don't think they necessarily copied either one of themselves. No. They just happened to have the same idea in 2 different parts of the country, which guess what happens.
Yeah, I didn't realize when that album came out, XX. I thought this was like their new album. This was like a brand new first album from Mushroomhead. Then I found out later that was a compilation album of tracks from their first 3 albums.
They'd been on the go for ages. So, like I don't know that. I still feel this, and we're going to get into it. I think Mushroomhead are a difficult band to market. Like, just in general, I think Slipknot is very easy to market, and I've always found that Mushroomhead sound never really like. Whereas you looked at Slipknot, we're going to drop the Slipknot chat in a minute, I promise. But you looked at that, and it was crazy, and it was barcodes, and it was like nuts, and it was anarchy on stage, and every instrument looked like it was like something that could hurt you. So as a whole package, it just looked like chaos. And Mushroomhead's music was a bit more nuanced. It was a bit more thoughtful, a bit more put together, a bit more proggy as well. And that image of these weird masks, like the horror image, didn't fit the sound ever. And I think that's where it was difficult for a record label to market them without saying they look like Slipknot, but they're nose heavy. Which is ultimately where you ended up with every time. Plus, they had fucking 2 vocalists, 17 guitarists, a banjo player, some cunt in the back playing accordion. It was too much, Dave. Too much. Remember when bands used... We're living through an age now where bands have went from being 9 and contracted down to 2 people now. I'm not saying Mushroomhead are responsible for that, but the shoe fits.
So, what do we make of Mushroomhead's new album, Call the Devil? How did your call with the devil go? Did you stay on the line or did you hang up, Duncan?
Right through the voicemail. Panicked. Had to reset the voicemail 3 times, delete it because I was just waffling. So we can be honest about this one. It isn't generally not the sort of album that we would cover. And the reason behind it is this is not our wheelhouse. Yes, it came up in the new metal era, but neither one of us were Mushroomhead fans, right? Songs,
Yep.
fine. Like the singles tended to be good, and I enjoyed them.
Yeah.
But I was never like a Mushroomhead albums guy, and I'm an albums guy. I like buying an album, listening to an album. I don't like buying an album to listen to a song.
Yep.
There's no fun for me there in that. So I did. There was a part of me that did come in this with a heft of trepidation, because we were like, have we just been in our comfort zone, Dave? Have we just been picking albums we knew we'd like? And the internet, I'm sure, has been judging us on that. So let's roll the dice, and let's see what comes up here. And what's come here is a mixed bag.
Okay.
I have some positive stuff, and trust me, I do. Like the positive stuff, I'm very high on, right?
Okay.
I have some stuff that kind of frustrated me a little bit. I have some questions around the production. We're going to get to it. And then I have some stuff that just doesn't gel with me at all, right? I'm going to compare this to a lot of bands as we work through this. So strap yourself in. What I will say about them is I don't read the press, so I'd missed the memo of some personnel changes. I didn't know there was an inclusion of female vocals. Love that element. I think it completely broadens her sound. I think it's usually well, and she's got such a fucking cool tone. She can do that kind of almost snarly 80s kind of chick rock sort of vibe, but she's also got like a very, very beautiful clean tone when the rasp cuts out it. And some of the better bits of the album where they actually kind of take the front step and everything else kind of takes a back step.
Yep.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I find the first half of this album tedious. Right?
Oh, okay.
I find the back half of this album the album that the whole album should be. And it's kind of twofold. I have an image of what a Mushroomhead track kind of sounds like. And the first half of this album is that version of that Mushroomhead track just played again and again and again. It's relatively generic sounding riffs. It's those vocal lines that, I'll give them a credit. Vocally, he's very playful. He'll like kind of run up and down scales without necessarily sticking to root notes. Enjoy that aspect. But what I found was the instrumentation that was extra, like some of the synth stuff, kind of annoyed me. It didn't really make sense. The kind of circus theme didn't really work for me. And I'm a dog fashion discos guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like a little bit of fairground organ flung in something. It does make me smile. I found it like very much out of place here, considering that the album's called Call the Devil. I expected something a little bit more in line, a little bit less kind of theatrical, and a bit something a bit more devilly. That might just be me, and I might be missing something there. They've always had that kind of theatrical kind of circusy thing going on. I just expected it not to be as prominent here, and it's prominent in the first half of the album. It drops in the back half of the album. What I will say about the first half is, whilst I think the riffs aren't the most inspiring thing I've heard, they still have that technique that I love about getting kind of playful with kind of almost stuttery versions of riffs. So they'll add, like, instead of, like, when they go into a groove, it might be something like da, 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 you know, something like that. They'll start going da, 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 da. Like, they'll just add those notes in, and then they'll switch it on the next one and bring it back. And they've done that for the longest time, and it kind of is that unique kind of signature sound, the same way that Silverchair has your tom bangs down with the guitars chunking in with it. It's a part that sits with the sound, and to hear them, you get a little bit nostalgic. But there's nothing out with maybe track 4, which is We Don't Care, which is a big old 80s rock banger, where the female vocals take kind of forefront. There's nothing about it that just like hooked me in. You then get past track 7, so the halfway mark of the album, and from Grand Gesture onwards, I kind of thought this album was fucking great. And it reminded me, we did, what was it? What's the name of the... It's Avatar's the name of the band, isn't it?
Avatar.
And we reviewed their last album, and we were in different boats. Like, you liked the first half of the album, I liked the back half of the album for completely different reasons. I can see you putting your hand over your face. I think we're in the same boat here. The back half of the album is much more experimental. It's much more proggy and it's much more interesting. I think at that point, the music actually sits better behind the theatrical delivery of the vocals. I find, like, when I was listening to Grand Gesture, it's not going for heaviness. It actually feels like a kind of old school sort of ballad.
Yeah.
That works with their sound, and they're very fucking good at it. Vocally has a bit more of a kind of croonery tone.
Yeah.
So why not do more of that? The keys made sense because it was piano sounds. There's little hooks that they're playing on, little licks at the end of guitar bits, which like worked, made sense to me. It flows into Hallucination, which is track 9. It's another one that has the female vocals kind of take the forefront on that one. It's kind of playfully, it's kind of heavier, and it has a bit more kind of chuggy chug with it, but at the same time, they had these quieter build-up sections. Reminded me a lot of American Head Charge, especially from that second album, where they were doing a lot more of kind of bits where Sims would echo out and the guitars were really pan-muted and kind of held back. Hideous, which is track 10, is a little bit of a kind of lazy one for me, but it breaks up that sound overall, as is Torn for 2, and then you get Shame in a Basket, which is the longest track here. Technically the closing track. Doom Goose is the closing song, but it's like the beginning of Eye to Eye, which is the opening song where it starts playing with the kind of, it's an outro essentially. Shame in a Basket's fucking awesome. And it's a big old 8-minute song, so you've got huge proggy elements, and I'm in for the whole thing, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And it kind of frustrates me that, from my perspective, all the things that I like about this album are squirreled away to the end, and I have to get through the front half of the album, and then I did my due diligence, and I jumped on to see where the singles have come from.
Yeah.
And the singles from this album are all from the front half of this album, which totally makes sense to me. They're marketing their sound on people that will check out the first half of the album. They've never missed a beat, never missed a trick. They're still hitting those chuggada riffs. And for some reason, they've squirreled away some of the better ideas to the back half of the album. Production, a bit of an issue for me. It does not surprise me that you've just told me that the drummer is the producer. He's a fucking very drum-heavy sounding album. But it's also very synthetic in parts. The cymbal sounds are flat as a pancake. The bass drum sounds are triggered. And the tom work is accentuated. Let's put it that way. Which is a bit frustrating for their sound, especially when you get to that back half of the album. And I can hear some really cool kind of proggy things, and then an amalgam of drum sounds flung in over it. Which, I mean, once again, doesn't offend me. Mushroomhead sat with industrial influences in their sound.
Yep.
So I would just lean fully into that then. I would just have, like, industrial drum kit sounds and maybe not try and make them as human, as they are. So, yeah, it's a very frustrating listen for me. I'm very curious to hear why you didn't like the back half of this album, which to me is the band at least trying something that doesn't sound like regurgitated riffs they wrote 30 years ago. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Why am I wrong and you're right then?
I wouldn't necessarily say you're wrong. I would say, where to begin? So Mushroomhead, they always had that nu metal streak. But it was never full blown. It was never a full blown nu metal streak they had. They always had that tinge of something experimental about them, and I think that, to be honest, has facilitated their kind of development over the years. The way they've introduced more alternative and industrial and dark.
I think it's one of the reasons they're still on the go.
Yeah, probably.
I think if they'd fully just leaned into that nu metal sound, that this band doesn't exist beyond 2005.
For sure. I think that the last album certainly showcased more of that experimentation, adding a fair dose of that kind of like industrial kind of heavy groove with the gothic synths. I thought the last album was okay. Maybe kind of blended together a little bit too much at times, which left it feeling a wee bit repetitive, but it had a few standouts. Seen It All is an absolute banger of a track, and I liked the addition, like yourself, of the female vocals that came on the last album, but overall, it was kind of somewhere in the middle for me, that last album. with this new one, let's also start off with the good stuff.
You're doing a reverse Duncan here. Right?
Yeah,
Come
so
here.
the album opens with a riff that can only be described as like a country-inspired Lamb and Nod. Like, it's banjos a lot, like very chuggy, very groove laden. Yeah, it's very conventional in the arrangement. They don't add anything out of the ordinary, but I thought it was like a good opener just to kind of get things moving. Had a cool groove to it. Nothing I haven't heard done like 100 times before, but I thought it was fine. Fallen Line continues with a kind of similar level of heaviness in the guitars, but with a little bit more of that Mushroomhead quirk. There's a little bit more touch of the gothic in there. It's embedded with some electronics, and vocally there's more layers going on. They bring in Jackie to add a bit more kind of emotion to the track. And like that aside, like vocally, there's plenty going on in this album. Like they have 3 vocalists in the band, so like texturally and tonally, it's very varied on the vocal front. There's also quite a Faith No More influence on this release.
100%. Yeah. I
Like,
think a lot of that comes from that kind of more proggy element, especially how the synths are used and the bass.
yeah, for sure. They've had like little hints of it in the past, but like tracks like Emptiness and Grand Gesture, which are a little bit less riff heavy, you can really hear those Faith No More vibes coming from the vocals, the piano, and like you said, like the bass work as well. And the album kind of, as it starts to go on, it starts to show off like various sides of the band. With We Don't Care, giving you more of a kind of southern, kind of hard rock feel on the guitars, but it's got a little bit of that kind of industrial undercurrent, and something kind of hook laden in the chorus as well. Or UIOP, which is kind of leaning, I felt like it was leaning kind of more into that like quirky dog fashion disco type kind of eccentricity. It's got that kind of like demented fairground kind of vibe about it. Or like Prepackaged, which is like the new metal characteristics are fully on display on that track. So the first half of the album, I kind of thought like it was all right. Like I was kind of engaged in it. I thought like that it was kind of keeping me interested. Vocally, I felt like this could be one of the strongest things they've done. Like I thought the harmony's really good. The mix of tones was interesting. They don't overuse Jackie's vocal on the album. They just have it coming in on certain tracks. And it kind of like, I think if they had it on every track, it might have been overkill. So I think it does work in kind of breaking things up. And in terms of a mix of styles, it starts fairly kind of groove, kind of metal heavy, and then does slowly kind of start to branch off into like different musical territories that are, you know, a little bit more experimental on the Mushroomhead side of things. The second half of the album,
Have we moved from Dave's like let's talk about the good stuff.
yeah,
We're moving to your bad stuff now,
we're
right?
moving. The second half of the album was where I downed the remainder of my beer and started to get my coat on. Right, boys, I've had enough. Taxi. And it was kind of like it was down to a couple of different things. For me, there was parts of the second half of the album where it was just too theatrical for my tastes.
Right.
Like, and they've always had it. Yeah, they've had that kind of
It's been all
dramatic
the way,
side.
yeah.
That is not something new. For me, some of it was just too heavy on the theatrics, and it kind of pulled me out of the album. The second half of the album I found weirdly less memorable than the first half of the album, and some of that is down
I
to
don't think that's right. I would be struggling to remember any of the hooks in the back half of the album. It's kind of why I like it though, because
Right.
I think the first one's not memorable. It's predictive.
yeah, it's,
You know
yeah,
what I mean? Whereas the
100%.
back half of the album is not predictive at all, and as a result, not memorable. So.
I think like some certain motifs and riff structures are a wee bit kind of reused on the album, as said there. Where it does feel like you've heard it already. Not only that, but you know the riffs aren't the most innovative on this album. They do just remind you of a load of other bands, but mainly that lack of memorability for me was caused by the sheer length of the album.
It's a long.
I found this really like
long.
too long, far
album,
too
Dave.
long.
Yeah, I mean,
especially.
it's 13 songs, and the second to last song for Mushroomhead is like 8.5 minutes long. Whilst I love that song,
Yeah.
it is 8.5 minutes long.
Yeah, this album, it clocks in over an hour. All right,
Yeah.
just just to point that out.
What was it? Bang for your buck, Dave? Is that what you're saying? Bang for your buck.
There's a lot of bang for your buck here. And like, as much as they try and vary the album with different genres and like different levels of darkness, for me there was a definite cut-off point where I just kind of started to drift off and kind of lose interest. I thought the album was about 20 minutes too long. Personally, I got to about the 40-minute mark and I was like, okay, this is starting to kind of run out of steam for me. That being said, I agree
Chop
with you.
off the first 4 songs, then that's 20 minutes off the album,
Yeah.
Dave. So.
The second last track, Shame in a Blanket, I really liked. I thought
It's
it was
fucking great.
a really good track.
Just give me that. Give me 5 of those songs on an album.
Yeah, I liked the kind of more long form attempt. I think, yeah, it is the longest track on the album. It's more slow burn in its arrangement, but I really liked that kind of piano build up and it getting more intense over time. Really good vocal chemistry as well. I thought that was great. The way they kind of like intertwine the male and female vocals. It's got a little bit of a kind of more poppier kind of melody in the verses, almost like. I mean, I don't want to piss anybody off, but you know, a little bit kind of like in this moment, slightly. I did feel
The
like
internet is hating us this week. Honestly,
Probably,
everything we're
probably.
doing is just like fucking, like it's like punching a baby on camera. What are we doing here, Dave?
I felt like the final track that came after it, Doom Goose.
Yeah.
It was kind of unnecessary for me. Like,
Totally not needed.
why?
Your
like,
album's over an hour. Why are we doing this?
didn't feel like it added anything of substance. I felt like Shame in a Basket would have worked as the closer. Production wise, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. There were certain parts or elements of the production I didn't love either. I wasn't too bothered by the drums. They do sound a little bit
I mean, they're fine. They're just, to me, they're lacking character.
almost come across as kind of sampled, but I kind of thought it was okay because they do have a bit of that kind of like industrial tinge to them, so I thought they got away
100%.
with it. Certain guitar tones didn't work for me. They were a little bit, the first half of the album I thought the guitar tones sounded okay, but then certain elements in the second half it was a wee bit thin sounding, but it was maybe just because they were going for a different style. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I mean, Mushroomhead, I think, have always been kind of hit and miss for productions. I think some have been better than others. And this one, I didn't think it was terrible. I thought it was okay. It was an okay production. Yeah, I think some of the sounds are a little bit synthetic. Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's not got the most character about it, but I thought parts of it were well recorded. The first half of the album, I thought they had a good kind of weight to them, those kind of heavier tracks. But as I said, the guitars did maybe sound a little bit too fizzy sometimes, at times a little bit too digital maybe. But yeah,
It's a good word.
yeah, it's well mixed. And for having so many moving parts, like 9 members in the band, I thought actually it was balanced, not too bad. Yeah, it's not a bad album. It's not a remarkable album either. I think had they cut it down a bit, removed the weaker
All the stuff that I liked.
all the weaker tracks, I think it might have had a bit more impact. But it's not one that I imagine I'll be like rushing back to. I think there is still a lot of this here that is derivative of a particular era or of particular bands. And this is neither.
Or themselves.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Really?
Yeah.
There was certain riffs on here that made me think this is what a band who wanted to sound like Mushroomhead would write.
Yeah.
As opposed to Mushroomhead, it's weird to describe. It's very hard to articulate, but you know when you hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what would you score on this one? What are you thinking for this?
It's a difficult one for me. I'm
It is.
torn between a 2 and a 2.5. I think I'm going to lean maybe. Do I want to be mean or do I want to? I do like the back half of the album. I really, really do. I'm going to come in 2.5.
I'm the same. I was exactly
I
the same.
like the back half of the album. There is a good 5 songs in here that I genuinely think, like, I would go back and listen to. I wouldn't really go back and listen to anything off the first half of the album, to be honest, because
Yeah.
I've got better versions of it on previous albums. So
Yeah, I was the same. I would kind of like cherry pick from this album the tracks that were kind of fun and had a good time with. The rest probably not so much. So I was exactly the same. I was right down the middle with this album, 2.5. Yeah, that's your new Mushroomhead. Let us know what you think if you've heard any of the singles. Once you hear the full album, because there is like some big differences between stuff they've released as singles and stuff that's on.
Singles are all literally within the first 6 tracks, so nothing beyond track 6, which to me is where the album gets sexy.
I'll put some links below. Have a listen, check it out, see what you think. Happy to hear your comments on it. That is the review. Mushroomhead, Call the Devil, out on August 9th. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
I'm sorry, the devil can't get to the phone right now. Please leave your name and a number, and he'll get back to you right after the beep.
You're killing me with all your